My name is Alex Mercer. I'm 27, and this is the night I realized love isn't a scoreboard, and how a red bow on a car finally made me stop keeping score for everyone but me. If you enjoy real-life stories like mine, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. I can still smell the cinnamon rolls my mom set out at 5 in the morning, the kind that come in a spiral tin that pops like a small firecracker when you twist it. It's funny what you remember. The clatter of a cooling rack, the sound of my dad's slippers, the way the thermostat clicked to life in our Naperville house. Pushing warm air through vents I used to hide Pokémon cards in when I was a kid. It was Christmas, the kind of Midwest Christmas that pretends it's going to snow, but decides on a dry blue sky, and a sun that makes the frost glitter anyway. I'd driven out from the city, late the night before with a pie and a bag of laundry and that mixture of hope and resignation you feel when you're returning to a house that has your childhood height marks on the pantry door and also a pattern you keep telling yourself might be different this time. My sister Jenna was the first to spot the bow, even before anyone opened presents. She pulled aside the design magazine Mom had left on the kitchen island and peered through the breakfast nook window. "No way," she whispered, but loudly enough that it was supposed to be heard. Is that for me?" She covered her mouth like she was going to faint, a little piece of theater she's had down since she was 8. In the driveway, there it was, a white BMW, the kind with the paint that looks like wet porcelain and a black interior that could swallow light. The bow was red and spectacular, like something a department store installs with a crane. When Dad flipped on the garage lights, the bow seemed to glow. He'd timed it. He likes reveals. He loves planning them more than almost anything else. He wore that satisfied look he gets when a plan lands. "Jenna, honey," Mom said, laughing through her words like the moment had taken her by surprise. "Go outside. The ribbon is going to stain the paint if we don't take it off soon." "Wait." Dad held up his hands, stage managing. "First photos. In front of the tree. Let's do stockings after. Alex, set your phone to portrait mode. I always take it too bright." I smiled. I took photos. I backed up so I could capture the bow through the window glass, Jenna squealing while wrestling into my dad's parka. I told myself not to make it into something beyond a gift. People give gifts. They can give different gifts to different kids. It doesn't have to mean anything cosmic. I had brought them what I could afford to bring. Coffee beans from the roastery by my apartment, a knit hat for Dad because the man refuses to wear ear flaps, a framed print of a sketch Jenna made in high school that I'd found in a box and had professionally matted because it deserved it. I'd also brought good news. I'd got it 2 weeks earlier, and it felt so good I sat on the edge of my bathtub in the dark after reading the email and listened to the pipes knock like drums. Associate Data Analyst 2, the title bump I'd been chasing for months. I'd written down on a note card a calm way to tell them that didn't make it sound like bragging because bragging is something we're not supposed to do in our family unless there's a bow. We opened presents. I got socks I needed and a sweater I didn't, which is always the ratio. My stocking had the usual, a chocolate orange, mints, a little pack of tissues with snowflakes printed on them. My sister's stocking had the same, but with a fold of glossy papers stapled together, insurance documents, which my mom said were for responsible adults, and then winked at Jenna so big you could see her molars. And then Mom handed me a small, flat card. It had a cartoon snowman on it and a speech bubble that said "brr" like it was addressing me. Inside was a crisp $2 bill and a $1 bill with a note. Seed money for the down payment piggy bank. Mom had drawn a smiley face next to it, 3 eyelashes on each eye. "Cute, right?" she said. "It's silly, but you always were our frugal one. You'll turn $2 into 2,000 somehow. You're so good with, what's that thing called? Compounding?" Dad chuckled. "Jenna can't be running to class in that clunker. She's got clients now. She needs to look the part." I turned the bills over. The paper felt cleaner than the air in the room. "Thanks," I said, and placed them carefully back into the card so I wouldn't crumple them. I tried to hear my own voice the way a stranger might. It sounded polite. It sounded like a voice from a nice lobby. "Let's go look at the car," Jenna said, already halfway to the mudroom. My parents drifted after her as if pulled by the magnetic force of her excitement. I stayed in the living room a second longer than felt natural. Sat there with the card in my lap and the Christmas tree blinking softly, Blue, white, blue, like a patient machine measuring something in the air I couldn't see. I thought about telling them then. About the promotion, about the raise attached to it that meant the word down payment had stopped being something other people said. The note card in my back pocket was warm from my skin. The first line of it said, "I've got good news." It would have sounded cheerful in that room, if anyone had been in it. "Alex?" Mom called back. "Can you bring my puffer? It's on the banister." "Coming," I said. I slid the card into my backpack and stood up. On the mantel, a photograph from when we were 12 and 17 grinned at me, Jenna holding a trophy taller than she was, my arm around her shoulder. I remembered being genuinely proud of her that day, the way the gym smelled like popcorn and rubber, and how her ponytail frizzed into a halo in the humidity. That memory felt clean and good. This moment didn't. Outside, the air bit my throat. The car was a sculpture, a promise of speed and smoothness and something else. An announcement. Dad showed Jenna how to pair her phone, leaning into the driver's side, the way he used to lean under sinks to fix pipes. Mom circled the car like a curator, checking for dings that didn't exist. The bow made a slight papery hiss against the hood when the wind moved. "You sure you don't want to sit in it?" Dad called to me. "I'm good," I said, because it didn't feel like it belonged to a world I could sit in. We went back inside, and everyone talked over each other like people who'd had something taken off their minds. I waited for an opening for my good news, and found none that didn't feel like stepping into someone else's sentence without being invited. Eventually, we migrated back to the kitchen for cinnamon rolls. The frosting turned glossy in the heat. Mom pressed a plate into my hand and leaned against the counter, finally quiet long enough to look at me. "How's work?" she asked absently. "You're still working with those numbers?" "Data," I said. "Yeah, it's good. Actually..." I felt the note card in my pocket and took it out without reading it, my mouth moving by muscle memory. "I got promoted." "Oh, that's nice," she said, and kissed my cheek in that way where you feel lipstick more than you feel skin. "Your uncle kept asking how you were doing last week, and I said, 'He's doing great. He's always fine.'" She pivoted. "Do you think your hair would look thicker if you cut it shorter? I saw this TikTok where well, how would I even describe it? I'll send it to you." Jenna slid onto the bar stool beside me. "Do you think white wheels would be tacky?" she said, not looking at me, then laughed before I could answer like she'd made the joke for herself. I told myself I was too old to feel the feeling I felt then, but I did. That rising heat under your skin, that mix of embarrassment and anger that's not even about the money. It's about being in a room where your good thing is quiet, while someone else's good thing is a parade. It's about the accounting of 1,000 small moments that all add up to a number you haven't wanted to calculate, because the sum might be something you can no longer live with. The day unfolded politely. We ate lunch at 2 like we always do. Dad fell asleep on the couch, hand over his stomach in the pose of a man who has earned it. Mom stacked plates and hummed Jingle Bell Rock off-key. Jenna went out to sit in the car with the doors open, letting the heater run as if it had to be taught to be warm. When it got dark, I helped Mom set out the evening snacks. Cheese, crackers, the kind of olives that taste like the ocean. She said, "You're so good at this," like it surprised her every time I was helpful. At 10, Dad insisted on hot cocoa night while he scrolled through car forms on his tablet. At 11, Jenna asked if I could take a photo of her with the bow at just the right angle to catch the string lights reflecting in the hood. At midnight, I went upstairs to the blue room that used to be mine until Jenna decided she needed the bigger one for projects. My posters had been replaced by a framed print that said, "Live, Laugh, Love," in 3 different fonts. On the old dresser, my soccer trophy shared space with a candle that smelled like linen. I sat on the bed and opened my backpack and found the snowman card. I placed the 2 bills on my lap. The lines on Alexander Hamilton's face felt like a joke pointed narrowly at the person holding him. I didn't cry. I should have. Crying would have cleared something out. Instead, I felt my jaw lock and a stillness settle over me that I recognized from other moments in my life. Hard exams, our dog's last day, the night Jenna dented the Corolla and I took the blame because I was already insured. That stillness meant my brain was clicking into a different gear. Not fight, not even flight, something more like direction. At 2:06 a.m., I stood up. I packed. Not dramatically. Not like a movie where the suitcase won't close. I folded my jeans. I took my charger and toothbrush and the book I'd been pretending to read. I slid the 2 bills back into the card and put it in the backpack's front pocket. In the mirror, under the soft yellow bulb, my face looked older than it does in elevator selfies. Tired but not fragile. My eyes were clear. I sat on the edge of the bed for a minute, like I was listening to a radio broadcast only I could hear. Then I stood, picked up my bag, and opened the door. The hallway was quiet. The heat kicked on. The vents whispered. Downstairs, the tree was a lighthouse in a dark room, blinking, waiting. On the kitchen counter, I placed my house key from high school, the one with the blue rubber cover, and the card with the $2 on top of it. I stood there with my palms on the cool granite and waited to see if I would change my mind. Nothing in me moved. At 2:17 a.m., I opened the front door. The cold startled me awake in a way no coffee ever has. I slid into my Civic, which has a dent on the passenger side that looks like a frown, and a heater that only truly warms your toes if you keep them pointed at the vent. I turned on the engine and watched my breath ghost the windshield until it began to clear. Before I pulled away, I went to my phone and slid my finger over 3 names: Mom, Dad, Jenna. I turned off notifications. Then I pressed and held and hit block. The screen asked in polite gray font if I was sure. I tapped yes before the warmth could leave my hands. I didn't look back at the house when I drove away. The neighborhood lights blurred as I turned onto the main road, then to the interstate, then to the city. The lanes were empty in that way that makes a person feel both rebellious and invisible. My mind replayed small tapes. 5th grade awards night. My parents arriving after the program ended because Jenna had a school art show. High school graduation dinner where they wanted to talk about Jenna's roommate assignment more than my scholarship. The time the air conditioning broke in my apartment during a heat wave and Mom said, "Oh, sweetheart, we're heading to Michigan for the weekend. You know how your father gets in humidity." Chicago at night from I-88 is a string of teeth, white and yellow, the skyline a faint promise ahead. I turned off the radio so my thoughts had nothing to compete with. A rest stop near Oak Brook glowed like a spaceship. I didn't stop. At 3:02 a.m., I passed a semi that looked like it was sleeping. At 3:29 a.m., I parked in front of my building on Belmont and sat there with the engine running and the heat on high, my hands cupped over the vents like holding a campfire. My phone lit gently in the cup holder, buzzing with no one I'd allowed to reach me. Inside, my apartment smelled like last night's candle and winter air. I dropped my bag and sank onto the couch, which is a hand-me-down from my friend Mateo, a software engineer with a talent for plants. I laid back and stared at the ceiling where a crack runs like a river. The silence pressed in. It wasn't heavy. It felt like a room where the concert hasn't started yet. I slept in my clothes, on top of the covers, and woke up at 9 to light coming in hard through the blinds. There are mornings that begin a different chapter whether or not you name them that way. The city was more itself than usual. A bus sighing, a neighbor dragging a suitcase, a dog barking at nothing. I made coffee. I made a list, not a New Year's list, not a dramatic new me list, a practical one. Call the building manager about the thermostat. Pick up groceries. Text Mateo and my friend Priya, because people should hear you're okay, even if you don't have a tidy paragraph to offer. Come over, Priya texted back in a minute. I'm making pancakes and I don't trust myself not to burn them. When I got to her place in Lakeview, she handed me a spatula like a baton in a relay. You can tell me everything or nothing, she said, and squeezed my shoulder. Either way, I'm going to send you home with half the berries because I always buy too many when they're on sale. I told her some. Not all, just enough to set the scene. She didn't ask for more than I offered. She put the kettle on because I like tea after coffee. She remembered I take honey. It is absurd to call that moral instruction. But in that kitchen, the lesson landed as clearly as if it were on a page. You can choose where the warmth comes from. You can choose to be around people who listen when you talk and who don't always redirect the spotlight to themselves. You can choose to stop auditioning for roles you don't want anymore. I went home with berries and a full stomach and a sense that I wasn't a person who had run away in the night, but a person who had finally walked in the only direction that wasn't a circle. The next day, I sent an email to our HR portal and booked a session with a therapist whose photo on the provider site looked like she had a voice that had never once rushed anyone. Her name was Dr. Franklin. The soonest appointment she had was January 3rd. I put it in my calendar and closed my laptop. The thing about blocking someone is that the phone doesn't ring, and the thing about not hearing from someone is that you start wondering what shape the silence takes on their end. I looked out my window and let the thought exist without feeding it. In the absence of that old feedback loop, the apartment felt louder. I noticed the hum of the refrigerator, the neighbor above me pacing, the soft chitter of heat moving through pipes. Over the next week, I did what my life already contained. I worked. I made charts that looked like clean windows. My boss, Linda, had given us the week between the holidays as optional if our projects were in good shape, and mine were. I set up my new roles permission set and worked through the tutorial modules with a satisfaction that felt like arranging silverware in a new drawer. Mateo came by with a plant cutting in a mason jar and held it up like a prize. "It's pothos," he said. "It thrives on neglect. Not that you neglect things. I'm saying it's hard to kill. I should stop talking." "I like that it's hard to kill," I said. And we laughed because saying that out loud in my apartment felt like we were making a plan with the universe. On New Year's Day, I took a long walk. I watched a kid in a puffy jacket make a snow angel in a dusting so thin it was basically sidewalk chalk. I looked into windows where other families were eating brunch. I made a promise to myself that didn't sound like a vow someone would break. I would not go where I was not seen. Not in a bitter way, in a rationing way, like water in a dry season. I could be generous with others without being drought-stricken afterwards. I told her some, not all, just enough to set the scene. She didn't ask for more than I offered. She put the kettle on because I like tea after coffee. She remembered I take honey. It is absurd to call that moral instruction, but in that kitchen the lesson landed as clearly as if it were on a page. You can choose where the warmth comes from. You can choose to be around people who listen when you talk, and who don't always redirect the spotlight to themselves. You can choose to stop auditioning for roles you don't want anymore. I went home with berries and a full stomach and a sense that I wasn't a person who had run away in the night, but a person who had finally walked in the only direction that wasn't a circle. The next day, I sent an email to our HR portal and booked a session with a therapist whose photo on the provider site looked like she had a voice that had never once rushed anyone. Her name was Dr. Franklin. The soonest appointment she had was January 3rd. I put it in my calendar and closed my laptop. The thing about blocking someone is that the phone doesn't ring. And the thing about not hearing from someone is that you start wondering what shape the silence takes on their end. I looked out my window and let the thought exist without feeding it. In the absence of that old feedback loop, the apartment felt louder. I noticed the hum of the refrigerator, the neighbor above me pacing, the soft chitter of heat moving through pipes. Over the next week, I did what my life already contained. I worked. I made charts that looked like clean windows. My boss, Linda, had given us the week between the holidays as optional if our projects were in good shape, and mine were. I set up my new roles permission set and worked through the tutorial modules with a satisfaction that felt like arranging silverware in a new drawer. Mateo came by with a plant cutting in a mason jar and held it up like a prize. "It's pothos," he said. "It thrives on neglect. Not that you neglect things. I'm saying it's hard to kill. I should stop talking." "I like that it's hard to kill," I said. And we laughed because saying that out loud in my apartment felt like we were making a plan with the universe. On New Year's Day, I took a long walk. I watched a kid in a puffy jacket make a snow angel in a dusting so thin it was basically sidewalk chalk. I looked into windows where other families were eating brunch. I made a promise to myself that didn't sound like a vow someone would break. I would not go where I was not seen. Not in a bitter way, in a rationing way, like water in a dry season. I could be generous with others without being drought-stricken afterwards. At my first session with Dr. Franklin, she asked, "What brought you in?" And I told her it was a bow on a car and 2 crisp bills and a card and everything they stood on top of. Her office had a green rug that matched nothing and therefore matched everything. She listened like she was sorting clothes into piles, not for the purpose of throwing anything away, but to make it possible to find the clean shirt when you needed it. "Do you feel angry?" she asked. "I feel inefficient," I said, surprising myself. She smiled, not at me, but at the way the word had landed. We talked about patterns, about family narratives that sound like compliments and behave like cages. We talked about the child who decides to make it easy for everyone else and the adult that child becomes. We talked about how leaving is a sentence that can contain commas and still be a complete idea. She asked me what I wanted from my family, and I timed myself in my head before answering. I gave myself a full 10 seconds to not say, I don't know. I want them to be people I can visit and leave, I said, without feeling like I'm taking a test on the way out. That's specific, she said, which felt like praise. Time made its usual movements. I did the math on my promotion with my budget and realized that the down payment I thought was 5 years away might be 2. The Civic sputtered through February, then April, then soldiered through a strange heat wave in May. I set up a coffee schedule with friends. Priya Monday evenings, Mateo Thursday lunches, a rotating Saturday with 2 people from my running group who ran slower than me, and therefore made me feel like I could breathe. I didn't hear from my family. That's not entirely true. I heard about them. Naperville is a network under the surface. My cousin Will DM'd me a photo of a backyard barbecue with the caption, "Your parents say hi," which is the kind of phrase that means absolutely nothing except that people say it. I deleted the message and did not feel mean about it. I felt like someone choosing between 2 snacks because I only had room for 1. In June, I received an envelope addressed in my mother's handwriting. I turned it over like it might have something heavy inside, but it was a single sheet of paper with a photo of Jenna standing next to the BMW in a parking lot. On the back, "Thought you'd want to see her big day. She's speaking at a networking event. You should be proud." There was no return address. The postmark said Chicago, which meant she'd mailed it while in the city for shopping or a dentist appointment she thought only downtown could properly execute. I set the photo on my desk, not face down or face up, but leaning against a pencil cup. It watched me work. I tried to feel the things the note was pushing me toward. Pride, at least uncomplicated pride, did not arrive on cue. What arrived was a shapeless ache and a quiet thought that I did not invite to speak. A thought that said, why is it always my job to convert things into the right emotion? At the end of July, Linda stopped by my desk and asked if I had a minute. She closed the little glass door behind her, a move that usually means budget cuts or secrets. "I need someone to lead the pilot with the downtown team," she said, eyes bright like she had news she couldn't wait to set in my hands. "Stickier data, messy stakeholders. I think you'd be good at herding cats," I said. "Thank you," while my chest grew 2 sizes. The project started in August. It meant more meetings, but it also meant I felt what I love feeling in work. A dad joke of a phrase, but true, useful. The kind of useful that ends at 5, not the kind that keeps going through dinner and into holidays. In September, Priya's cousin got married. The reception was at a hotel with golden lights and a band that knew just how to play the song you forgot you loved. I wore a navy suit that made me feel like a version of myself in good lighting. On the patio, between dances, I checked my phone and saw an email from an address I didn't recognize. Subject line, "Please read." The body of the email was short. It said, "Alex, this is Tom. I know you blocked my number. I'll keep this brief. Your grandmother's memorial is October 9th. I hope you'll come. Dad." It would be wrong to say my first thought was about logistics and not loss, but the logistics came quick, because that is how I protect myself from the sudden drop in an elevator. My grandmother, that steady, soft-voiced woman who kept stale cookies next to the good ones because, in her words, some people don't want to risk liking dessert too much, had been sick in the way that old age writes into the body. I had visited her in March, sat in a room that smelled like cleanliness and lemon hand soap, and told her about my pothos, which she said sounded like a Greek poem. She'd clasped my hand and said, "People get so busy deciding what something should be that they forget to see what it is." And I'd nodded and pretended not to make that sentence into a universal solvent. Stared at the email until the words blurred. I told Priya, and she squeezed my elbow and said, "We're leaving now," and got me out the back door without telling anyone goodbye except a passing waiter to whom she said, "We loved the salad," like that would explain an entire exit. I didn't answer the email right away. I gave myself 3 days, which was a mercy disguised as a rule. On the 3rd day I wrote back. I wrote, "I appreciate you letting me know. I will be there. I will sit in the back. I'm coming to honor Grandma." That last sentence I added because I needed to declare it, if only to myself. My inbox pinged with an auto-reply that my father rarely uses. It said he was out of the office and to contact his assistant if the matter was urgent. It made me feel like I'd sent a message into the ocean, and the ocean had printed a nice receipt. The memorial was in a chapel that had hosted baptisms and weddings and funerals for 100 years. The walls knew more about my family than anyone alive. I sat in the back as promised, and counted breaths like Dr. Franklin had taught me. In front of me, my mother's shoulders were small and straight. My father's head looked somehow heavier than it used to. Jenna's profile was perfect. She has always been photogenic from any angle, and that is not an insult, simply a fact. The pastor spoke about a life measured in casseroles left on porches and quilts stitched over long winters. He said, "She was generous in a way that does not require announcement," and my throat closed because the room tilted toward a version of love I recognized as true. After the service, I moved toward the exit like a person trying not to start a fire. I made it almost to the door before I felt a hand on my arm. Dad. He looked older in daylight, not older like a movie makeup artist would paint, older in the way a person's posture shifts when their version of events is a little too heavy. "Thank you for coming," he said. There were 100 things in his voice, half of them caught in places he no longer knew how to unclog. "I loved her," I said, because even with everything else I could put that sentence in the middle of us and know it would hold. "We should talk," he said. "Not here, but we should." I emailed, I said quietly, about the memorial. That's what I could do. Today, he nodded. A kind of nod that included an exhale he hadn't meant to let me hear. "Okay. Thank you for coming," he repeated, like he wanted to keep his script simple. Out in the parking lot, under that Sunday sky that makes everything look saturated, Jenna came up behind me. "Can we do coffee?" she asked, eyes bright in a way I associate with pitches, not people. She didn't wait for me to say yes or no before adding, "My schedule is insane this week, but I could do Wednesday at 11 if I push something." "I'm working Wednesday at 11, I said, and kept my voice even. "And most of the other times people are working." She blinked, as if I'd spoken in a different language, then said a quick, "Okay," which held an entire unsent paragraph. She hugged me without asking, her hair smelling like coconut. "You look good," she said when she pulled back, surprised, like I'd broken some rule and gotten away with it. I drove back to the city on streets I could navigate with my eyes closed. I noticed myself noticing that I was not shaking. I noticed that my heart rate did not climb a wall and sprint across the roof and bang on the door again. I noticed that I had done a thing I did not want to do because it was the right thing, and that I had not given away more than I had. October wore sweaters and then coats. At work, the pilot project turned into a partnership. I learned the names of the downtown team's kids because you cannot build something without learning what matters to the people holding the other end of the board. I went to therapy and said brave sentences out loud and let them sit between us like new furniture we were deciding whether to keep. I made a pot roast on a Sunday and accidentally invited too many people, and discovered that if you slice potatoes thin enough, they multiply like kindness. In mid-November, I got an email from my mom. The subject line was my name. The body of the email began with, "I know you probably don't want to hear from me." She wrote like a person who had rehearsed too many drafts to know which one was her voice. She said she missed me. She said there had been misunderstandings. She said she wanted to start over. She said that families have ups and downs and that the important thing is sticking together. She signed her name, Mom. And then, in parentheses, Carol. Like she was remembering the wide world where people would not know the automatic roll. I did not write back for 24 hours. Not because I was trying to inflict a feeling, but because I needed to borrow some time to shop for a reply that fit. When I did write, I kept my sentences small. "I appreciate the email. I am willing to sit down with you and Dad with a counselor present. I am not willing to have a conversation without a third party. These are my terms." I read it out loud and listened to how the words touched the air. It was adult, not petulant. It was a boundary that did not need to be explained to be valid. She responded with a sentence that held more exclamation points than necessary, then another email that had 0. Like she realized punctuation was a vote she didn't want to cast prematurely. She agreed. She asked if I had anyone in mind. I asked Dr. Franklin for referrals who did family work. We picked the earliest slot the day after Thanksgiving. I booked it and put it on my calendar and did not open the email chain again. Thanksgiving. I made pies with friends and did a long run in the cold and took a nap on my couch with the plant cutting now thriving on the windowsill. The Friday after, I put on a sweater that made me feel like a teacher who gives reasonable deadlines and walked into a neutral office with a bookshelf arranged by color and a box of tissues placed in that unobtrusive way that means help is available without being an accusation. The counselor's name was Ethan, had the gentle voice I'd expected, without the performative slowness I'd feared. He started with ground rules. We nodded. My parents sat on the same side of the couch like a couple on a morning show. I sat opposite. We were a triangle made of 3 people who had rehearsed different musicals. I want to be clear about my goals, I said, before anyone could read from a script. I am not here to settle a score. I don't want an apology that is performative. I want us to name patterns, and if we can't, I want to leave this room having said clearly that I won't participate in them anymore. My dad shifted, his knee bouncing like a nervous metronome. My mom looked at him like handing him a baton. He cleared his throat. We didn't do things perfectly, he said, but we did our best. I believe you did your best, I said, and it was true. I also believe your best hurt me in ways you didn't see, and I didn't have the words to describe at the time. What do you want then? Mom's voice cracked, not with tears, but with the effort of bending into a shape she had not tried before. I want you to stop calling me the independent one, as a way to explain why I should get less, I said. I want you to stop narrating my life to our relatives as if I'm always fine, because that's the easiest version of me to carry. I want you to admit that you bought a car for Jenna on Christmas and gave me $2, and that the symbolism wasn't lost on anyone, least of all me. That was a joke, Dad said, quick. The $2. Your mother thought it would make you smile. It didn't, I said. It did something else. What? Mom leaned forward, genuinely, for once. Her eyes looked like they had in certain rare moments in my childhood when I'd been sick and she'd sat on the floor with me and told stories about her own grandmother's garden. It told me I was investing in the future, so other people could enjoy the present, I said. And that felt familiar. For the first time in my life, perhaps, I watched my parents' faces rearrange in front of me in a way that didn't feel like acting. Shock, then discomfort, then something quieter and harder to name. They looked at each other and didn't move to rescue the moment, which meant maybe they were letting themselves be caught by it. I don't know how to fix that, Dad said slowly, but I can think about it. Thinking is a start, the counselor said. Acknowledgement is an action. I want to say something, my mom said, and folded her hands like she was going to pray, and didn't. I did lean on you. I told myself you could carry it because you looked like you could. And I liked that. I liked having someone in the room who didn't need me as much. It made me feel successful. She winced at the word, but let it exist. I appreciate you saying that, I said, and meant it in a way that seated itself in my chest. We also did nice things for you. Dad rushed in, as if something in him needed to keep the ledger balanced. We helped you with that security deposit. We came to your games. 2 truths, Ethan said gently. It's possible that you did kind things, and it's possible that there was an imbalance. We can hold both. The session lasted an hour and a half. We did not fix decades. We did not leave holding hands. We did something better. We named what needed naming. I walked out into the bright afternoon and felt not lighter, exactly, but shinier. Like the layer of dust on a piece of furniture had been taken off, and, yes, there were new fingerprints now, but you could see the grain of the wood. Over the next several months, my parents and I did a thing I didn't know we could do. We practiced. My mom texted me about her day without adding an ask. My dad called and talked about running shoes, of all things, because he had started walking in the mornings and wanted to know if there were sneakers that made his knees hurt less. Jenna and I exchanged memes like people who know the same references and also know that jokes are sometimes a bridge you build when there's nothing else you're capable of building yet. I did not rush the closeness. I did not reward good behavior with immediate access. I let it be awkward when it was awkward, and let it be sweet when it was sweet. I declined 2 invitations that would have involved me being the de facto tech support at a holiday party. I accepted 1 invitation for brunch on a Sunday, and it went fine, which is to say no one cried, and no one made me the narrator of their recovery story. In March, Jenna got into a fender bender. She called me. Not because she needed me to fix it. She said, "I know you deal with paperwork at your job. Can you help me understand what this insurance form is trying to say?" I walked her through it on speakerphone while I made a grilled cheese. I did not drive out to Naperville. I did not put my cape on. I did not remind her about the bow. I answered her questions, and then I said, "I've got to eat while the cheese is still melty." And she laughed and said, "Okay." And it was ordinary, which felt like a milestone. In May, I closed on a small condo. The kind of small that real estate agents call efficient, and mean it. A bedroom the size of a reasonable closet, a living room that could hold 6 chairs if 2 of them were folding. I signed the papers and was irrationally proud of the pen I got to keep. After the closing, I went to the place by the river where everyone takes photos, and I took one. Not performative, just proof for the me who would look back later and say, "That happened." I did not send the photo to my parents. I hung a cheap curtain rod by myself and called Matteo to help me fix it, because I hung it wrong. He came over with a drill and a level and said, "I will do this right if you make me pasta." And we called that a fair trade. When I finally invited Mom and Dad to see the place, I sent the message a week in advance and said, "Sunday at 2, 1 hour." I gave myself an end time because the nervous system likes appointments. They arrived on time with a plant that I had to gently admit was not going to survive my windows. Dad stood with his hands in his pockets like he was afraid of touching something that might break. Mom walked around tiny room by tiny room and said "cute" 3 times, which is a word that used to make me feel small, but now, oddly, felt like a size label I could live with. When they left, Mom hugged me and said, "I'm proud of you." And for a second, that sentence didn't turn into a thorn. There's no tidy ribbon on a story like this, which is ironic given the way we started. But there are moments. Bright, quiet ones. Like the evening Jenna sent a photo of a job flyer she'd printed on regular paper and taped to a coffee shop wall. "Freelance illustrator available. Reasonable rates." She wrote, "Feels weird to put myself out there." And I wrote back, "Weird is where the good stuff grows." She sent a smile emoji that, for once, didn't feel like a shield. Or the afternoon my dad forwarded me an article about budgeting and said he wished someone had taught him this earlier. Like he was practicing the language of asking for a different future than the one he knows how to drive by muscle memory. Or the morning my mom texted me a photo of 2 tiny candles she bought at a craft fair with the caption, "Thought of you, didn't buy them. You have enough candles." Which was her way of telling me she was trying to stop throwing gifts at feelings she could just sit with. A year after I left at 2 a.m., I hosted friends in the condo that still smells faintly like fresh paint and cumin on Sundays. We sat cross-legged on the floor because my couch hasn't arrived yet, and ate salad out of bowls that don't match. We played a game where you tell a true story in 3 sentences. When it was my turn, I said, "Once I was given a gift that told me a story about myself that wasn't true. I left a house in the middle of the night and unlearned that story. Now I'm writing a better one." The room hummed with the kind of approval you don't need to bow for. Someone refilled a glass. Someone asked me for the dressing recipe. Matteo knocked his knee into the coffee table and apologized to the table. The plant on the windowsill leaned toward the light like it always does. Later, after the last plate had been stacked and the last apartment warming candle extinguished, I stood at the window and looked out at the city. It glowed in pockets. I could find my street if I squinted. I could not see Naperville from here. I turned off the lamp, and the room turned into the kind of dark where you don't feel alone. My phone buzzed once, a text from my dad. It said, "Sent the check for the counselor. I know you didn't ask." It felt right. I typed back, "Thanks," and put the phone face down. It wasn't a grand gesture. It didn't need to be. It was one of 100 small repairs. I think about that red bow sometimes. How a thing can be both beautiful and blinding. How you can untie it and reuse it next year without anyone noticing the crease. How under all the presentation there is just the object itself. A car, or a bill, or a person. Me. A person who learned that love isn't a bonus at the end of the year. And worth isn't what other people pour into you when their hands are free. It's the quiet decision you make at 2:17 a.m. to turn the key and go. It's the phone you set down after you block a number and the quiet that follows that sounds, against all predictions, like peace. Family should be love, not logistics. It should be care, not credit. Some days in my family it is. Some days it's still something else. On the days when it's the something else, I keep my shoes by the door and my boundaries like the good dishes. Used, not saved for company. On the days when it's love, I stay until the coffee is gone, And the conversation has softened into the kind where people tell you the small thing they're afraid of, and you say, "I've been afraid of that too." And it binds you in a way that a bow never could. And that's the whole of it, I think. Not a breakthrough as much as a steady walk forward. Not dramatic, just decisive. A person in a small condo in a big city making dinner for people who look you in the eye when you talk, and who don't mind that you like your salad dressing a little too lemony. A person who keeps 2 crisp bills in a drawer not as a wound, but as a weather report that warns you when a storm pattern is returning. A person who knows that you can set a card down on a kitchen counter and choose to be the one who keeps walking, which is its own kind of gift.